Tonight we are discussing part 2 of War Crimes Court. It's actually supposed to be a debate between the pro and cons of War Crime Court with our guest expert, who is a legal expert in that field, Attorney Charles Sunwabe Jr. Attorney Charles Sunwabe Jr., welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you for having me.
All right. The attorney will be joining us via phone. He's going to be on the phone, and he's a legal expert. He's going to explain to all the TRC and everything in between.
Okay. So once again, Attorney Sunwabe, we tell you welcome. And to tell our audience a little bit about our guest today, Attorney Charles Sunwabe Jr. received his Juris Doctorate degree from Washburn University School of Law in Topeka, Kansas. He also holds a bachelor's degree in international affairs and African politics from the George Washington University, and a master's degree in world politics from the Catholic University of America. Attorney Sunwabe is admitted to practice law before all Pennsylvania state courts, including the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, as well as the United States District Court of the Western District of Pennsylvania. While still a student at Washburn University Law School, he was licensed by the Kansas Supreme Court as a legal intern and began representing indigent clients through Washburn University Law School Clinic. During this time, Attorney Sunwabe gained vital legal experience in client counseling, witness preparation, and dealing with opposing counsel and judges. He went on to a successful practice before the Shawnee County District Court in Topeka, Kansas. So once again, welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And we want to welcome our viewers across the globe. This is Focus on Liberia. We are continuing our Opposing Views series. The last time we discussed War Crimes Court Part 1. This time is Part 2. We also discussed dual citizenship. This time we want to go to Part 2 of War Crime Court based on popular demand. People were asking us, they wanted to do this again, so we're here. So anytime there's the cry for War Crime Court in Liberia is becoming louder and louder, so we thought that we call a legal expert to just lay it out for us. So anytime you hear war crime or you hear War Crime Court, our attention is drawn to two institutions. First, that's the International Criminal Court, and also the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So, Mr. Sunwabe, first of all, is our legal expert. We want to get your opening statement before we begin.
Well, let me say this. Let me preface my remarks by saying this. Crimes committed against humanity or crimes classified as crimes against humanity cannot be forgiven, and they cannot be pardoned. Okay. The law in this area is extensive, and as well it is settled. Where crimes against humanity has been committed, there is an international duty to prosecute. Like Liberia, like other countries like Sierra Leone, Rwanda, and the list goes on, those crimes deserve international attention, and quite frankly, the norm says that they should be prosecuted. The world said from Nuremberg until today that those crimes will no longer be tolerated.
Thank you, Attorney Sunwabe. Let's start by first asking you, what is the ICC and what are its powers and jurisdiction? And let's so that us if that covers what we want to talk about when we mention War Crimes Court for Liberia.
Well, there seems to be a misunderstanding about Liberia's need for a war crimes tribunal. I followed the debate on Facebook. At one point, I was one of those who was always involved with the debate, although I have opted to take a different route nowadays, a route that is consistent with the demand for war crimes court. Look, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, it came about in 2003. It is also known as the Rome Statute. Now, as far as jurisdiction over crimes against humanity is concerned, the ICC had jurisdiction over all crimes committed against humanity post 2003. So from 2003 up to today, wherever there is a civil war or military engagement, when the forces engage, conduct action or carry out operations that fall outside of the law that we all agree upon as far as war is concerned, or the conduct of war is concerned, the ICC will look at that particular country, look at the situation, and can invoke jurisdiction and say, hey, crimes against humanity was committed here. We are going to investigate it. So the ICC can take independent action, irrespective of what a particular country thinks or believes. Now, with respect to Liberia, I'd like to clarify this one thing for everybody today. The ICC does not have jurisdiction over the crimes that were committed against Liberian humanity from 1990 up to 2003. Those crimes fall outside of the ICC statute. Now, does that mean that they are not crimes against humanity? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the ICC cannot independently invoke jurisdiction over the crimes committed in Liberia today and say, hey, Republic of Liberia, hand over General Prince Johnson, hand over Alhaji Kroma, hand over Sekou Diamante Kone, they committed crimes against humanity in Liberia. ICC has no jurisdiction over those crimes. What has been the norm internationally prior to the ICC is that when crimes against humanity occur within a particular jurisdiction, that jurisdiction is obligated. It's obligated on an international arrangement. If you look at statutes like treaties like the Geneva Convention, the Convention Against Torture, and on, the affected country often asks the United Nations for a tribunal to try those who are responsible for that crime. Now, Liberians get this confused. I've heard people saying, oh, the ICC need to come here to prosecute. No, the ICC has no jurisdiction. Liberia, though, is on a legal obligation to ask the United Nations to establish a war crimes tribunal in Liberia for the victim of this horror that was visited upon all of us.
So why is it that the ICC has no jurisdiction over Liberia's war case?
Well, as I just put it, the ICC, you see, when you look at statutory construction, let's look at statutory construction, for example. Whenever a statute becomes law, okay, that statute is passed, say, by a legislature. That statute becomes effective as of the day that it was passed. So if I pass a law today that says, hey, Attorney Sunwabe, you can no longer drive on, let's use an imaginary street K. Well, if that law passes today, I can no longer, as of today, drive on street K. But until that law passes and become law, I'm allowed to drive on that street. I can go on street K. I can do whatever I want to do there with my car. As long as I'm driving under existing rules and existing law, I am fine. But as of the date that law becomes law, I can no longer pass it. So let's go back to the ICC. The ICC did not exist in 1990. The ICC did not exist in 1994, for example, when Alhaji Kroma carried out massacre in Banga on ethnic grounds. It did not exist in 1990 when Charles Taylor went to Bakeru and slaughtered innocent Mandingo people. The RCC did not exist then. So the RCC has no jurisdiction over those crimes. Who has jurisdiction? The international community does. But the way the international community has operated since the Nuremberg Tribunal has been that the affected country comes to the international community and says, look, these crimes were committed against our people. We need to have it prosecuted. And then the international community will establish a tribunal, often appointing a neutral prosecutor, usually not from the affected country, to head the effort and to begin the process of prosecution. That has been the norm that control conflict prior to the RCC, and that norm is still in place. It wasn't jettisoned at all. It's still in place. One of that norms, Liberia, as a member state of the United Nations, is obligated to come to the UN and say, crimes were committed against our people. We need to have this crime prosecuted. And that's where Liberia has stalled.
All right.
I think you've made that very clear. So looking at what we had talked about on part one, I guess you're saying that Liberia is outside of the jurisdiction because the crimes were committed prior to July 1st, 2002. I believe the ICC can exercise its jurisdiction in a situation where genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes were committed on or after the 1st of July, 2002. And so that's why the ICC cannot exercise its jurisdiction. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you said that in Liberia's case, someone from Liberia would have to, or Liberia would have to address the United Nations and call for help for a war crimes court. And so who has the authority to make that case to the UN? I guess definitely the president, but are there any others who would have the authority to make that call to the UN?
Well, okay. Let's. Your question is loaded. Let me back up. Let me back up and give you some examples of where this is happening and where a particular country has stalled. Let's take, for example, you heard about the Khmer Rouge. Okay. Why is it that all of a sudden we started hearing, oh yeah, Khmer Rouge guerrilla leaders, XYZ, those on the side of the government, blah, 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 needed to be prosecuted. Let's go on our own continent. Why is it that Sierra Leone, all of a sudden, Atty who asked the United Nations for a war crimes tribunal for Sierra Leone? Well, two things happened in Sierra Leone. First, the crimes, as you and I know, was gruesome by any standard. Now, that crime pales in comparison to what happened to Liberians. Okay, some of the worst crimes against humanity were committed in Liberia. In the case of Sierra Leone, pressure was brought to bear on Atty. That pressure came about in two ways. There were members of the international community who were sympathetic to Sierra Leonean humanity, led by Great Britain, who said, look, this crime is grave, but we think we know where the problem comes from. The problem is Liberia's Charles Taylor. So the way we're going to solve this problem is to establish a war crimes court here to hold everybody accountable. Second, Sierra Leoneans themselves push their government, push the Jankaba, that look, this has to happen. Sierra Leone went to ECOWAS. Sierra Leone applied pressure in the region. Even Nigeria, that was hesitant from the outset, wound up being the largest financial contributor to the Sierra Leone tribunal, though nobody in the West will write about it. A vast majority of the bill was paid by Nigerian taxpayers. That's how the tribunal came into being in Sierra Leone. With pressure from the Sierra Leoneans themselves and international pressure being put on Tijan Kaba, that pressure came with threats of sanctions being imposed on Kaba and his government, threat of economic aid being discontinued, and Kabah was forced to face two evils. He opted to take the right route.
Okay. So and you already answered the question, because our Facebook guests were asking, okay, if the crimes were committed prior to the setting up of ICC, why is it that Charles Taylor was taken to The Hague? And you answered that by saying that this.
Let me clarify. Charles Taylor was not taken to the Hague Tribunal. Again, another misunderstanding. Charles Taylor was only tried in The Hague because regional players, i.e., again, ECOWAS country, in concert with the United Nations, feared that if Mr. Taylor were tried in Liberia or in Sierra Leone or in the sub-region, given the support that he had, it might have contributed to continued instability. So a decision was reached at the United Nations Security Council in consultation with ECOWAS and the African Union to move the Taylor trial to The Hague. However, Taylor was not tried by the Hague Tribunal. It was the Sierra Leone Tribunal sitting in The Hague that tried Charles Taylor. Let me clarify here. Tribunal established, say, in Liberia, can, out of security concern for the state or neighboring countries, agree to sit, say, in Washington, D.C. to try a Liberian warlord. You can do that.
Thank you for that clarification. So a special court was established for Sierra Leone. What will be the process? And I know you mentioned that in bits and pieces today. What will be the process for that court to be established for Liberia? And who needs to take the lead?
Mr. Jah, you know, we've known one another for quite some time. And when I spoke to you about coming on your show, I made it clear to you that I wasn't so sure if I'm neutral on this issue. And, you know, being honest is part of being an attorney. What needs to happen in Liberia, you push me to, you know, push the elephant in the room. First of all, Liberia needs to understand two things. Even under Liberia's own law, crimes against humanity constitutes a crime. Under Liberia's own existing law, what happened there is criminal. The second thing we need to note is that Liberia does not have a judiciary trained enough, adequate enough, impartial enough, capable enough to try the perpetrators here. Thirdly, we need to draw on the history of the past. Where this has happened in other countries, the right route has been the president of that country asked the international community that, look, this crime took place here. I need help to get it prosecuted. Now, let me address another misconception in Liberia. There seems to be this belief that, you know, people need to forget this crime and move on. Here are some of the problems that we face with that argument. The victims have a right to international justice in this capacity. Okay? The crime was committed against you. You deserve to be heard. Secondly, and the most important point I love to drive home today, crimes against humanity is not only committed against the affected country. It is committed against humanity, all of us. So, for example, if Dennis Jah is an American and he's sitting in his dining room in Arlington, Virginia, my adopted home state, and watches this brutality in Liberia and is profoundly impacted by it, he doesn't even have to be impacted by it. But the very brute nature of that crime gets to Mr. Jah. Mr. Jah himself has become a person of interest who is also entitled to justice. Okay? So this is not a crime that was only committed against Liberians. This is a crime that was committed against all of humanity, wherever and whenever. And the appropriate solution under the law, under the existing international law, is that when it happens, when a crime reaches a certain stage, Lawyers call it jus cogens crime. When we reach that stage, there's an international right to prosecution. And the affected country is on an obligation to follow the law. Liberia is obligated to seek this court. Now, what happens if Liberia doesn't? If we were in a country where rule of law exists, where we have courts, Liberia doesn't have court, in my opinion. A court does not exist there. We have a court lookalike, an institution that is defective at best. But if we have a proper judicial institution, then maybe a group of victims could take the Liberian government to court to compel the government to follow the law. But you file a lawsuit in Liberia today, all it takes is a white envelope or brown envelope between the lower court to the Supreme Court, and the issue is dead.
You raise a good point about crimes affecting not just the people of that country, but just humanity in general. And so I think that's a great segue for us to talk about Resolution 1055 that I believe was introduced by U.S. Congressman Dan Donovan. So I had the opportunity to read it today, but I'm still not sure exactly what is the power of that document. Just to read for our viewers, the very beginning portion of the resolution says that this is to affirm strong United States-Liberia ties and support for democratic principles and call for full implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. And then it goes in detail about, I think, what some of those recommendations are. So here is a U.S. congressman. I believe his jurisdiction is for Staten Island in New York, which has a large Liberian population. So just what is the power of this document, this resolution?
Well, the resolution is a powerful piece of resolution. Well, first of all, again, we should not look at our resolution in isolation. Let us look at Liberia as a country today. And again, this is one of the places where I might not be so neutral. Liberia is an aid-dependent state. In my view, it is a failed state, a chronically failed state that have, seriously failed African state that has institutions that only exist in name, okay, in names only. We have Supreme Court. We have separation of power, House and Senate, or as somebody put it, brown bear experts, for where there's money is where the legislature runs for their own belly. Okay, so you have a defective system in place in Liberia, a government that exists only in name. So what does the Liberian government depends on? Foreign aid is the biggest thing. Somebody must pay 60–70% of our budget. With the piece of legislation that you are referencing, what is happening in Washington, D.C. is that groups with interest in Liberia are pushing the House that, hey, if this resolution is not heeded to by Liberia, then some of the tools that are being used in the past to force leaders, dictators, pseudo-democrats who don't follow the rule should be used here to get Liberia to honor its obligation, honor the law. What are some of those tools? The same tools that force the Yankabato Act. A could be withheld. In that case, Joshua will be digging down the street of Monrovia to find money to pay his people. Sanctions could be imposed on the leadership of Liberia, including President Weah himself and all of his cabinet ministers. Sanctions could be introduced against the head of the legislature. Sanctions could be imposed against the useless judiciary. When you do that, you force them to come to the table. So those are some of the tools that people have used in the past.
Ladies and gentlemen, once more, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing War Crimes Court Part 2. Our guest is Attorney Charles K. Sunwabe. He's our legal expert tonight who is discussing the War Crimes Court of Liberia, the ins and outs and everything in between. Go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, it's just thanks for the clarification on that. And so just so that our viewers and we also can be well informed, right now, you know, it's a resolution that's been, I think, given to the Foreign Affairs Committee. What would be the next steps or possible next steps for this document in Congress?
The possible next step is Liberians who love peace like me, who want to live in a peaceful society, should begin to call their congressmen. Again, let me give one piece of important information. There's a very powerful Republican congressman in Washington, D.C. He's the chair of the House Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs, and I think he also chairs the Subcommittee on Africa, His name is Representative Royce. Liberians should call him. And Liberians should call him and tell him to put pressure on Liberia so that Liberia can abide by the rule of law. Let me tell you this, it was Royce who single-handedly stood up to Nigeria, stood up to President Obasanjo of Nigeria, and forced Nigeria to hand over Charles Taylor. It's the same Royce today who is in the same position. So if we love our country, we should call Royce and say, look, our country has to act. We need your help to move the needle so that Liberia can move in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, until justice is coupled with reconciliation, Liberia is doomed. You can't have peace without justice, given our condition, our current condition. And let me add, peace is not the absence of justice. Peace is the inclusion of justice, particularly after a brutal civil war.
So, Attorney Sunwabe, we have the TRC, or the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Its work was to be able to, first of all, there are two words being thrown around: restorative and retributive justice. Explain that before I go to the TRC, if you don't mind.
Let me tell you this. Let me go back. I am familiar with both terms, and I am familiar with how they've been used in the Liberian context. Okay, people are talking about restorative justice. Oh yeah, you know, let's forgive. Let us move along, blah, 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 blah. Let me say something about this notion, okay? The whole idea of forgiveness stems from the Abrahamic faith, okay? Forgiveness comes naturally. It is not forced. You cannot force anybody to forgive. And true contrition has at its core a genuine sense of remorse. In this case, we are not talking about people who are remorseful. We're talking about people who want to cover up and people who want to impose their will on everybody else. When you have that, some of the people might not be so welcoming of that idea. And when that happens, you set yourself up for greater chaos. Now, retribution. I am not so sure that holding people accountable is the same as retribution. Nobody's talking about retribution here. When you prosecute for war crimes committed against humanity, you hold people accountable for their action. So these terms have been thrown out there and they have been misused.
Right. So explain for us what really they mean so that we better get an understanding of those terms and how they can be used vis-a-vis our war crimes issue.
Again, the best and simple way to just capture, rephrase everything I've said is this. When somebody tells you calling for war crimes court means that people are calling for retribution. You simply tell them, no, nobody wants retribution. I don't think anybody in Liberia wants retribution. If Liberians wanted retribution, they would be taking guns and be fighting and shooting one another. Everybody's opposed to that. That's not retribution. Nobody's seeking retribution. People are saying people should be held accountable. You hold somebody accountable when they knowingly violate the law that protects all of society. You are telling them because you violated this law, these are the consequences that you are responsible for. So that's not retribution, it's accountability. I think Jerome Verdier has gone over this over and over. Samuel Kofi Woos, Councillor Tiawan Gonglo, just to name a few, have all said it over and over. Nobody's seeking retribution. People are saying that people should be held accountable. Okay, restorative justice, forgiveness, and what have you. Again, the Liberian people have forgiven those who committed these crimes against them. The fact that everybody can walk around Monrovia, go to parties and enjoy the Liberian people have forgiven. But the real issue, the quintessential issue here is accountability. You cannot have forgiveness without accountability. And those of you who are Christians, I will know that when Jesus Christ died on the cross, he did not say, I wipe away your sin, go and sin perpetually. He said, I wipe away your sin, but these are the rules you must follow to get to the kingdom. It's the same concept. The Liberian people are forgiven, but they're saying with forgiveness comes also accountability. That's what we're talking about. People throw phrases that are incompatible with the reality that we're talking about here as a means of distracting people. And that's sad.
All right. So that takes me into the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Was it meant, because some of the things we say, was it meant to replace a war crimes court? That's the first question.
No, it wasn't. And again, people indict Jerome Verdier falsely. It was never meant to replace a war crimes court or to replace the right to justice. Jerome could have come out. If Jerome have come out and said, okay, Liberians, we are all related, nobody should be prosecuted, people will still be going after a very fine attorney, in my view, a very fine man, a friend of mine. Okay, people would have gone after his character state. You can throw, in my view, you can throw the TRC away completely. You can throw it away, the report away. Liberians will still be entitled to justice. The TRC in no way undermines or court the right to justice. Not at all.
No, but the TRC recommendation, it recommended people coming feeling sorry for what they did and saying sorry. If they did that, then they won't be recommended for war crime. Those who refused were the ones being recommended for a war crimes court. Isn't that the case?
Yeah. I'm done at all. That's not my understanding of the document. But let's assume that that's what Jerome, okay, let's assume Jerome came out and say everybody should apologize and you get to go away. Remember that at the outset of this discussion, I said people were entitled to justice. So Jerome came and he said that. And forces within Liberia said, look, crimes committed here were grave, we are entitled to justice. They put pressure on the government. If we had a court, they take the government to court, get a decision, compare the government to act. At that point, when a neutral prosecutor is appointed for Liberia, he would take a look at all of those people who were pardoned by Jerome and say, no, I am not bound by anything that Jerome Verdier did. A fine example is in the case of Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge. Again, pardon was granted. When a neutral prosecutor was appointed by Cambodia, in his opening statement, he said, I am under no obligation to honor any forgiveness I will grant to anybody. I will investigate this crime as a neutral fact finder. Where I think I do have a case, I will take the case to court. And he did that and successfully prosecuted people who were forgiven. I don't think Jerome Verdier has committed any crime here for which people should be indicting and having vilified. I don't think so. And as to whether somebody will be forgiven in Liberia, it is left with the prosecutor appointed to prosecute the crimes committed in Liberia. He can decide that I do not have a case, and if I took this case to court, I might not prevail. That's up to the prosecutor. But you cannot be both the offender and the definer in chief, where you define where people who you offended sit and how they grieve. I've never heard of it.
On the other side of the argument, where some people are saying, Liberia cannot have a war and economic crimes court because with the Liberian war, there was no real victor. And so they say in the case of Rwanda or in the case of Sierra Leone, there was a side that won, so to speak, and that they could then call for a so in those cases, do you know if people on both sides of the war were actually tried, or if it was only one side that was tried for their atrocities?
Not at all. People on both sides were tried. There were people who fought with Paul Kagame who are serving life sentences today. Okay, I've heard this argument again. This is a ridiculous argument made by people who are either directly related to warlords or are in the pockets of warlords. And these are arguments that are made purely along ethnic lines. Okay, there were victims. There were victims on all sides of this war. And the fact that nobody, quote unquote, won the war still does not erase the fact that crimes were committed. There is no society, I am unaware of no society post the Second World War where this level of crimes has taken place and it has been swept under the carpet, and that particular society or country has gone on to be a viable democracy. The day they show me one will be the day that I will say I am in.
If you just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing War Crimes Court Part 2. And our guest is Attorney Charles K. Sunwabe. Most of the time we hear War Crimes Court. Of late, economic crimes have been added. So War Crimes Court, War and Economic Crimes Court. Are those two courts or just one?
Well, I think people are asking for one court, but they are saying that the war itself occurs as a result of economic crimes, looting from the national treasury that took place in the 1980s, created a condition that made it necessary for many young people to pick up arms or to be easily manipulated by the warring faction. So the call for an additional court called the Economic Crimes Court, in my view, is Liberian people saying we want to wipe the slate clean, we want to start clean, we want to hold people accountable, also for creating the conditions that might lead to greater war or problem down the line. So I don't think that the two issues can be separated, but as to whether the War Crimes Court is given an authority to prosecute economic crimes is something that the UN and Liberian authority will have to reach. I do think, though, that Liberia needs judicial help. In my opinion, I've argued in the past, and I've written in the past that Liberia deserves a judicial trusteeship because we do not have a competent court in the country, and any society that does not have a competent court is doomed to fail. So, and let me go back and look at some of the economic crimes committed on a person's leave. What happened to the Brooklyn case? Information Minister Brooklyn, order for certain the prosecutor did not show up. Time in and time out cases dismissed. Edwin Snow dismissed. Again, there's an important legal question that I, as a person, have. In fact, I intend to do an article on this, and it is whether or not those dismissed cases will not be retried. Of course, again, anybody who reads anything in Liberia says that double jeopardy has attached. But my understanding of double jeopardy is that it attaches when there is a neutral adversarial process. An arranged process is not adversarial. And most of these cases in Liberia take place where bribery defines the outcome. And it's sad, it's pathetic, it's disgusting, to say the least.
I hear most of the those who call for the establishment of War Crimes Court also say the full implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendation. Number 7 of those of that recommendation say that a court of competent jurisdiction be established in Liberia to deal with cases immediately upon the submission of the TRC final report. You are saying Liberia is not ready for that. So your sense of a war crime court is something that needs to be established by the international community based on the recommendation of Liberia.
Let me clarify here. I don't think Jerome is saying anything in Article 17 or whatever article you just quoted. They're not saying anything wrong. When a war crimes tribunal is established for a country, first of all, that court, the tribunal itself operates on the affected country's rules of criminal procedure. For example, if one were established today, and I will tell you this, Liberia has some of the finest criminal codes I've ever read. The issue is not whether Liberia has laws on the books. Liberians are brilliant. We've written brilliant law. The real issue is, do we have honorable men and women who can enforce the law? My views are that we do not. Now, when you establish the war crimes court in a country like Liberia, what's going to happen is that the court is going to use Liberia procedural rules to try these cases. Okay, Liberian court is not competent enough. The court in Liberia are not competent enough to try this case. I am unaware of any country where the affected country court was deemed, neutral, competent, and was tasked with carrying on the burden of trying these cases. What usually happens is that the tribunal is established, it exists in the country, it uses your local rules to prosecute the case. And I think Jerome was calling for a competent tribunal established by the United Nations that is neutral in nature, that is not subjected to the wills of any of the players, cannot be manipulated by the blind angels that have become so common with the Liberian judiciary. And I think that's what he was talking about.
Okay.
So the Truth and Reconciliation recommendation stated that the heads of the warring factions and anyone with a major role in the war should be prosecuted. But some of Liberians' concern is that many people played a part in the war, sometimes not willingly. So what can you tell us of what was done, probably in Sierra Leone, where child soldiers were used? Exactly who was prosecuted and who was forgiven and let go without any sort of consequences?
Well, again, the decision to prosecute a particular case is left with the neutral prosecutor appointed by the international community at the request of Liberia. So when a prosecutor, for example, was appointed for Sierra Leone, he and his investigative team got together, they look up all of the crimes, they look at the players, they look at the roles of the players, and made a decision as to who was culpable, who could be held accountable, who could be tried, and who the prosecutor felt that he had sufficient evidence to convict. It's the same thing here. Liberians are crafted and making excuses again. It might be that are based on unnecessary ethnic pandering. Okay, let us have a court. It is the right of the victim. It is the right of our countrymen and women. It is a right that cannot be swept under the carpet. Let us petition for a court. Let us have a neutral prosecutor appointed. Let him take a look at the facts. The prosecutor might totally disagree with Jerome Verdi's recommendation for pardoning, as you guys have cited. He's not bound by anything Jerome said in that piece of document. He can say, Jerome said Charles Williams should be forgiven, but I am saying on the basis of the evidence, this child, particular Charles Williams, should have known better. So, all of these arguments are unnecessary arguments. They are gimmicks designed to prevent justice. Have the court, the neutral prosecutor, will take a look at the evidence, and he would decide what cases he's going to prosecute on the basis of the facts. Now, I have heard many times that, there were forces who raised money. There were people outside of the country who financed this war. Yes, if you raise money and your money went to buy arms and you aided and abetted crimes against humanity, you will be held to account. But people cannot use these excuses as a means of, obfuscating reality and suffocating justice. It's sad.
All right. I mentioned about the court in Liberia has recommended by the TRC. Here is what it says. In order to implement the recommendation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of the Republic of Liberia to establish an extraordinary criminal court for Liberia, an internationalized domestic court to combat a culture of impunity, secure justice for victims, and ensure that Liberia adheres to, respects, and protects prevailing international human rights and humanitarian law standards. An extraordinary criminal court for Liberia hereinafter court is hereby established. So it is that internationalized domestic court. What's your understanding of that internationalized domestic court? What will it look like?
Again, as I just explained, Jerome is not saying anything out of the box or anything that has not been heard in the past or practiced in some other jurisdiction. What Jerome is saying there is, you are hearing the voice of a guy who loves his country, loves his countryman, and is troubled by what has happened there. He's also expressing he and his commission are expressing their deep reservation, reservation with respect to our judiciary, that we do not have a competent court in our country to carry out this task. So, like other jurisdictions, I just cited Cambodia, we need an internationalized court to come here and help us to prosecute these crimes. That's what he's saying. Jerome is in effect admitting that we do not have a court in Liberia. And we're done. We Liberians fool ourselves. America has Chief Justice so much weak. America has Supreme Court so much weak. Look at the character on our courts. You call a court that has somebody like Kabina Janet, who participated in the mass massacre, a court? Give me a break. You call that court when Philip Banks could not account for the missing money from the Ministry of Justice.
Let's go to our Facebook participants. Jimin Eastman saying, how can Liberians at home seek international assistance in making those who committed crimes against humanity accountable?
Liberians should get together and write to the United Nations Security Council. Liberians should get together and do what other countries have done peacefully. The Egyptians got tired of Husni Mbari. They marched peacefully in Cairo and they asked him to leave. Maybe it's about time that we have a Occupy Monrovia march to gather in the streets of Monrovia peacefully and ask President George Weah to become a legend, like he became a soccer legend, to ask the international community to establish a court there, to ask the international community also to establish an economic crimes court to help us recover some of the lost money. This country has been looted beyond what is acceptable. There's nothing that is poor. Every Liberian wakes up in America to 20 to 25 phone calls from relatives, and some of whom you've never seen, you never heard from, asking you for a dime to make a living. We are pathetic.
James S. Keller is saying the America they are using to push Josh Weir, they don't even have in war crimes court. So why are they using them to push Josh Weir? This is complete nonsense. To put it, he said, America itself does not have a war crimes court. I think he's wanting to make reference to America not being part of the ICC. So he doesn't think that this country, has the moral grounds or in belief that Liberia should have a war crimes court established, if I can make sense of what he said.
When an American soldier engaged under the command of the United States commit crimes against humanity, he is prosecuted. America has an advanced judicial system that holds its own troops accountable. To compare what America does in terms of war with what happened in Liberia is quite frankly pathetic, and I don't even think that it deserves a response from me. But what I will tell you is, go back and look at some of the troops who engaged in the abuse of the Iraqi people and see where they are today. They were dishonorably discharged. They were tried and incarcerated. Name me one person in Liberia from the armed forces of Liberia in the past who committed atrocity and has been held to account. When you can show me one person, then we can begin to talk. The two are not the same. They are discrete.
I think Clarence Jackson is also supporting what you just said. So he's saying James Keller is wrong. He said the U.S. supported war crimes against Germany and Japan in 1945. Also, Japan paid heavily for in Hawaii. Your comments?
Of course. The United States, look, let me tell you the other thing also that is at play here between the United States and the RCC. I do not speak for the American policymakers, but I spent 6 years studying U.S. foreign policy, particularly on my continent. American policymakers are afraid that if they join the RCC, that any country that does not like America, disagree with American foreign policy, will rush to the RCC, will rush to the special prosecutor and say, hey, American forces did XYZ to me. The United States, the world only remaining superpower, is saying that, look, we have competent, capable judicial system. We have legal norms in place that we can use to hold our own accountable. We are not joining the RCC, but at the same time, we're not going to allow our own people to abuse people's rights overseas, particularly while wearing the American military uniform. The two things are different. The United States supported, like the guys at the Nuremberg tribunal. Most of the prosecutors in Nuremberg were provided by the United States. The United States provided funding for the Rwandan genocide. The United States provided funding for the Sierra Leonean genocide. It did not pay the majority of that money. The vast majority came from Nigeria. But it does support justice. In the Liberian case, you got a U.S. congressman, 2 U.S. congressmen, one from Georgia, whom you did not mention earlier, Mr. Johnson, taking the lead, saying these crimes were serious, they deserve to be prosecuted. I think we are to allow legal norms to take place in Liberia so that we can together come from the ashes of war and begin to build democratic societies that will hold our diversity together and help us build a country that we can all live with and live to our country. Deneja, you and I have been in the United States for quite some time. We've been here too long. It's time that we took everything we have back home to help build a vibrant society. And that starts with accountability, not excuses like retributive justice, free-spirited justice, forgiveness. Forgiveness has no place in this matter.
All right. So the in Liberia, let's come back to the process. What role will the legislative branch of government play in the establishment of a war crimes court for Liberia, and also the president, because it looked like much of the work is on the head of the president to get this done. What is the role of the judicial, of the legislative branch as well?
Well, they can pass a law calling for the implementation of the TRC, the full TRC report. They can pass a law calling for the establishment of a war crimes tribunal. They know exactly what to do. It is not my duty to tell them what to do. This is the body that claims that they represents Liberia and represents the interests of the Liberian masses. I mean, what more will be satisfying than to seek justice on behalf of the people that they represent? They know exactly what to do. But if I were Josh Weah, okay, if I were Josh Weah, a man who became a heroic figure for Liberian at the height of the Liberian Civil War, a man who once called for a war crimes tribunal, a man who was overwhelmingly elected by the Liberian people. If I were George Weah, I'd become another African who is exceptional in many ways. I will walk down wherever the president sits nowadays, hold a press conference, and call on the international community for help to address the issue of injustice in my country. I will call for a war crimes tribunal. I will call for help to revamp and relaunch my judiciary. If George Weah did those things, he would become again he would become a hero again. It would be a return to the day he won the World Best Soccer Star Award. But George Weah is pandering to the interests of those who bear the greatest responsibility for the destruction of this country. He's conducted himself poorly. He's losing support among many people who once thought that he was different. In fact, he's demonstrated in the shortest amount of time that he is, just another Liberian leader. But it's up to him. What I can tell you is that Liberians are not going to relent in their call for a war crimes tribunal. Liberians will exercise their rights wherever they have, they reside. They will ask for all of those tools that are being used against countries and leaders who refuse to grant their own people justice. Liberians will ask that those tools be used against Liberia until such time President Weah decides that he would like to be welcome among the civilized nation of the world. Until he does that, pressure will continue to mount.
All right, if you are watching us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing War Crimes Court Part 2. Our guest tonight is Attorney Charles Sunwabe. And if you want to call, the call-in number is posted there, is 646-876-9923. Again, 646-876-9923. Or you can post your questions or comments on Facebook, and the attorney is going to respond. Danielle.
I guess most of the war crime courts that you hear about in our discussions are Sierra Leone's case or Rwanda's case. What else do you think we can take from what happened in Sierra Leone or Rwanda can also apply to us, or why it would also be successful for Liberians?
What was the question again?
So what can we take from the case in Sierra Leone in comparison to Liberia and say that it's very much similar and it will work for Liberia the same way it worked for Sierra Leone?
Absolutely. Look, let me address some of the myths. And I know most of the guys behind this idea that it's a bad idea, we should opt for forgiveness, blah, 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 blah. I know most of those people. And most of them, I will tell you, are individuals who have direct ties to war. And this argument is based purely on ethnicity. It comes from the camps of General Prince Johnson, from the camps of General Alhaji Kroma, from the camps of Sekou Diamate Conte, and the list goes on. But some of the fear they play on is that, if you arrest these guys, members of their ethnicity are going to resort to armed rebellion. Well, it happened in Sierra Leone. It's a seminal country, similarly situated, like Liberia. We share some of the same ethnic groups. The killers were put on trial. Who do you see shooting in Sierra Leone today? Nobody. But also look at the benefits Sierra Leone has derived as a result of following through with international best practice and international legal law. First, by having the court sit in Sierra Leone, the court had overwhelming impact on the Sierra Leonean judiciary. Sierra Leonean judicial officials were hired. Sierra Leonean lawyers were able to sharpen their tools. Some of them directly participated in the trial, and the tribunal has ended, but the lesson learned is still with them. So you have a judiciary in Sierra Leone that, in my view, could be 30 or 50 years ahead of what we have in Liberia. Okay, so the tribunal had overwhelming impact on their judicial system. That's one. Secondly, because of that impact and because Sierra Leone opted for justice, the environment is peaceful. A peaceful environment attracts investment. Look at the investment going to Sierra Leone today, and look at what went to Liberia, even when Madam Sally was president. Again, we were still then a failed state. We lived on foreign aid. There was nothing dramatic to help us stand on our own feet. I think people were giving our aid because they like Madam Sally, and look at where we are today. We cannot even fund our own budget.
Another contributor from Facebook, Dave Jar, says, please rebuff or add credence to those who continue to maintain that all Liberians supported the war, therefore there is no need for war crime.
That is a myth. That's what I call, dishonest argument. Look, I was a student in Liberia. I was in high school. I did not support this war. I did not support any faction. I don't know where Charles Taylor came from. I don't know where Samuel Doe came from. None of those people. Yes. Yes, she's sleeping. Sorry about that. I did not support the effort. Dennis John is my friend. I've known him for years. I did not see him supporting any rebel. I lived in the Ivory Coast with a group of friends. And older brother, one of them whose name I will call is Notu Japa. We lived together. He's my older brother. I didn't see Notu Japa supporting rebel. I didn't see Ellington Duke Molly supporting rebel. I didn't see Ransford Savage, who lives in Minnesota nowadays, supporting rebel. Nobody. That argument is fundamentally flawed. Again, it is just a distraction employed by ethnic kingsmen who want to protect their tribesmen who committed atrocities against humanity. I think what is needed in Liberia today is for people to disagree with members of their ethnicity and to add on the side of Greater Liberia by calling for a tribunal. Look, I'm gonna just let you know, I was born to a minor father. I was raised in Bon County, my maternal home. But I support putting on trial minor and Geo people who committed atrocities. I support it. It doesn't mean that I don't love my countrymen, my ethnic kinsmen. No. But justice has no ethnic code attached to it.
Prince Williams is asking, why wasn't this same amount of pressure put on the Ellen Johnson's government for the last 12 years?
I cannot answer. I cannot speak for the international community. What I can tell you is that Madam Salif was good at lobbying. You might want to go back and do some research and see how much of the Liberian people's money Madam Salif spent on lobbying to help secure herself. But yes, the other elephant in the room. Talks have been around that Madam Salif aided and abetted crimes against humanity in Liberia. Let's assume that that's not the case. But if that is the case, and a neutral prosecutor is appointed for our country, she will be investigated. And where she is culpable, she will be held to account.
And just based on some of the feedback from the other viewers in the chat, I will say that the reason why some are saying the cry for a court, a war crimes court now is even louder than when Ellen Johnson was in office was that one, President Weah or the CDC promised or were asking for a war crimes court also. So, his supporters are expecting that they stay true to their word and support a war crimes court. And the other part of it is that some people believe that Ellen Johnson was a part of the war, and therefore they couldn't ask her to set up a court. Some people say that President Weah had no involvement in the war, so he would be the perfect candidate to call for a war crimes court. I also saw another question from Jimmy Eastman in regards to the cost of a war crimes court. So if Liberia was to ask the UN to help them to set up a war crimes court, how would that financially impact Liberia? And in the other cases that we know of, like Sierra Leone and Rwanda, did those countries have to use their own funds to set up the court?
No, I'm unaware of any country that has used its own funds to set up the court. One good example again, the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, okay, sitting in Europe. Slobodan Milosevic were brought before the tribunal. Ratko Mladic, Radovan Karadzic, all of those people who were one powerful generals were all brought before the tribunal and put to trial. A tribunal set up by the international community to try crimes committed against humanity is funded by the international community. It is not funded by Liberia. I've heard this lie being told again that, we should focus our money on development. Actually, a tribunal sitting in Liberia will help Liberia develop in many ways. One of them would be our lawyers, our young men, our brothers and sisters who are graduating from law school, could participate. Some of them could become clerks. Some of them could become assistant prosecutors. Some of them could become investigators. They will acquire knowledge, practice, experience that will live with them forever and will go on to help the Liberian judiciary. So we will derive benefit. The other thing you should look at also is you will be having, you will have the president of an international prosecutor in your country and a court in your country. The people coming to your country have to eat. They will buy food from you. They will buy stuff. They will take transportation. They will have economic impact, positive economic impact on Liberia. It is not true that establishing a court in Liberia diverts attention away from Liberia development. Liberia, in its current state, cannot attract a serious investor. People are afraid that without justice, peace in Liberia is impossible. So nobody is going to invest a heavy amount of money in Liberia. Forget it. We have shady investors, and we had them on our sleeve. 68 out of 70 contracts signed that were procured by fraud. We know that we have those kinds of people who will come in, bribe, corrupt, official, take over mines, and then flip it and sell it to somebody else. We have those kinds of people, but the kind of investment that will have positive impact on our country aren't going to come there because of our current state.
One of the arguments used by those calling for the establishment of war crime court, and this has been echoed by Rufus Tijen. He says the establishment of war crime court in Liberia will put fear in any would-be war perpetrator. On the other hand, others are saying people like Adolf Hitler, things like that don't deter them. These are hardened criminals who really will do what they want to do no matter what. What do you say about those two sides of the argument?
So do you leave the hardened criminal to just go around, rummaging and attacking anybody? My answer is no. You prosecute the hardened criminal. You bring him to book. You teach him that if you're going to live in this world, there are rules by which we all live. So I tend to agree that prosecuting war crimes court prevents others from repeating the same crime. Look at Rwanda. because of Rwanda, people are careful. People are a lot careful at, what they can do or cannot do when it comes to taking other people's lives. If we do not set a good example in Liberia, like the brother you just mentioned, what is there to stop other Liberians from doing the same thing and expecting society to forgive them? Let's assume that we buy this nonsense, that we're all related, we are all so similar, therefore we can't prosecute anything, right? So tomorrow the next man wake up, he kill people who do not belong to his tribe, and then he can tell the Liberian people, we are all family, you forgive Prince Johnson, Alhaji Kuma, Bisatu, and everybody else, George Bulley in the past, forgive me too. Is that how people build a country? My answer is no. We want to discourage future Liberians from going down this path. We want to prosecute these crimes. We want to lay a strong foundation for the democratic society. The way we do that is by discouraging future acts of violence. And it's by sending a strong message today that Liberia adheres to the rule of law, both domestic and international, and that Liberia would enforce existing international norms respecting people's rights and respecting crimes against humanity.
Roland Tokba is writing on Facebook, says, when a blind man says he will throw a stone at you, that means he already has the stone in his hand. America wants war crime court in Liberia. Do you think they are not willing to mobilize resources, especially with the death of the 5 Catholic nuns? My question to you is, what really is the incentive, or what will be the incentive of the international community, including Liberia, to support the establishment of war crime court in Liberia? Especially looking at the relationship President Trump is having with most of these developing countries.
Well, the one thing people should look at, people should never underestimate is that you look at President Trump. President Trump is saying that everybody should pay their way, right? Pay your fair share, be responsible for your own country, pay your own bill, do not depend on America. The incentives here, are common. They are not difficult, they're commonplace, and every Liberian should comprehend it. I started from the outset of this discussion. I told you that our country is aid dependent. Okay? Nobody wants to see an unstable Liberia in the region. Instability in Liberia draws in countries like the Ivory Coast, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and you name it. It could have impact in faraway places like Gambia. Trump and the Americans do not want to keep spending their hard-earned tax dollar supporting a country like Liberia. Everybody wants Liberia to stand on its own feet and become a democratic, free society where the rights of its citizens are respected, where it uses its own natural resources to support its own people. Okay? So when President Trump said, stand on your own feet or not, the one thing Liberians should know, though, is that the United States will always give aid to Liberia. But at some point, we cannot build our country on the basis of begging and begging and begging. We cannot beg our way out of poverty. So Trump is not going to stop Liberia aid today. I can tell you that. He's not going to stop it now. Congress provides funding for how the government operates. Liberia has a constituency here. Liberia will always get some type of aid. But that aid must be leveraged now. It must be paired with responsibility imposed on Liberia to honor its own law and international law to which it is a signatory. That's what people are saying. So maybe people think President Trump doesn't care, but since President Trump took over, has he cut off aid completely to African countries? No. And by the way, I'm not a proponent of aid. I do not believe that foreign aid works. But those aids are going to come. But what we're saying is countries who do not play by the rules get sanctions imposed on them to force them to come to their senses. And maybe Liberia is a candidate.
Jimmy Eastman He's back. He said, can your guest speak to the security threats made by those who fear persecution? Can you speak to those who threaten? If you prosecute me, I'm going to do something.
Look, I can tell you today, if they're thinking about Prince Johnson, there's nobody from the County that's going to take gun to get in the street for a man who have demonstrated that he cares about nobody else but his own pocket. A man who, for all practical purposes, is a crook. He's not only a warlord, but he's a greedy demigod. Nobody's going to fight. These guys are using their ethnic kinsmen as pawns in their continuing effort to insulate themselves. It's not going to work. Nobody is going to fight because Prince Johnson gets arrested today. Nobody's going to fight because Alhaji Kuma was taken into custody. Nobody's going to fight because Sekou Diamante Tonte is in jail. Nobody will fight because Roland Joe was arrested for his atrocity. And let me add this. Benjamin Yeten was indicted by the Salif government. The indictment was read by Ellen Johnson Salif. Benjamin Yeten prides himself as, just like Prince Johnson, as the savior of Nimba County. How many Nimbarians have you seen on the street crying or picking our arm because Yeten was indicted? Zero. These are all noise.
And just to kind of push you more on that question, some will say no one will pick up arms to, fight if Prince Johnson is arrested. I mean, but the truth of the matter is he has won a senatorial seat. Every election time, he's in the top 5. So clearly he does have supporters. You don't think that anyone in, who's voted for him would be willing to fight on his behalf or to fight to stop him getting arrested and tried?
Well, didn't you see these people coming up in Sierra Leone to fight? Did you see these people coming up to support the rebel leaders in Sierra Leone who were arrested wearing their very popular they were? Again, this is yet another diversionary tactic. Nobody in Liberia is going to fight because these people were held to account. However, if you do not hold them to account, you will be opening Liberia up for future problems. And why not prevent the problem today?
Soklo Te is writing, do you have any evidence in your possession now that will or can indict, for example, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf? Do you have a case against her?
Well, as I stated earlier, I am not the prosecutor appointed for Liberia. I'm not. If and when the tribunal is established, a chief prosecutor will be appointed for Liberia, and you investigate Madam Sirleaf for her role. Where evidence surfaces that she, aided in the big crimes against humanity, she's not above the law. She will be held to account.
Let me go back to Facebook, and Dave Giles saying, your perspective about Liberia as a failed state has some relevance and truth. Our institutions are extremely weak and there is entrenched incompetence. Liberia needs competent patriots to help build a vibrant nation. What can we do to build a better nation with functioning institutions in addition to a war crime court? And to add to that, most of what we say now or we hear is about war crimes court. Is there anything else that in Dave's world that will help build a vibrant nation?
I will, so that I don't sound like I'm praising myself. I have limited articles on Liberia. With respect to war crime, I wrote, we the victims, while Liberia deserves a war crime court. The person who's asking the question can read some of my articles. The person can read I can't even remember some of the names of my own articles, but you can read there and see So my suggestion with respect to democracy, I wrote that elections alone are not democracy. You can go to the perspective and read it. We need institutions. The conclusion of that article, I lay our case. I advocate judicial trusteeship for Liberia. Liberia should ask the international community that our institutions have failed rather than having a court and a system in name only. We should ask people to come in and help us to revamp these institutions. There's not, look, if you are sick and you are dying of malaria, if I have malaria and then a guy has the medication that can treat my malaria and he has 2 or 3 of them, I will ask Dennis Jar that, look, my remedy that I'm using is not working. Will you help me? It's about time that we Liberians sought help, particularly with our judiciary, so that we can begin to develop institutions that will support our democracy. I cannot agree more with the gentleman on Facebook. Our institutions have failed. They are not functional institutions. They are defective. They do not. They only exist to collect paychecks. Nothing is working. Liberia is a broken society. We need to remake it. The way we remake it is by seeking help that makes sense. And one of the ways to do it, I support judicial trusteeship for Liberia. I say I support judicial trusteeship for Liberia.
What does that mean, if you can explain a little bit more?
Well, a trustee simply looks after something for its owner. You know, he's not the owner of it, but something is entrusted in this, and that's the simplest definition of what a trustee is. We take our judiciary, we say it has failed, it does not work. We go to ECOWAS, we go to the UN, we say none of our courts are working. We want you to help us. Okay? We seek that kind of help. They come in, we can pay for it. The money in Liberia to pay for it. They appoint judges that will help us develop our institution and dispense justice. But that kind of court is separate from what exists there now. It's separate from the presidency. It's an independent court. It applies our law, and during that interim time, maybe like 10 years, we can train our own lawyers. We can really define what judicial independence is, and then we can have a court. What we have today does not work. There are people who file land complaint dispute since 2006. It has not been heard till today.
That will be another topic of discussion, especially with the prison conditions in Liberia. But if you just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We've been discussing the War Crimes Court for Liberia. Our guest, Attorney Charles K. Sunwabe Jr. And this is part 2 of our War Crimes Court debate. It should have been a debate, but we had some of our guests not showing up. So we had the honor to having Mr. Sunwabe filling in for everyone else. So before we draw down the curtains, let me read a few more comments from Facebook. Prince Williams is saying, don't mind the nonsense Prince Johnson is talking. Charles Taylor was even more popular. When they took Charles Taylor, nobody fought. Stephen Elsa said, to build a vibrant Liberian society, we must establish a foundation based on justice and equality. Fanaja Bazagi, Prince Johnson's supporters are not illiterate to understand the magnitude of his crime. And your cousin James Davis is rooting for you. He said, yes, cousin Charles, I support your vision.
That's nice. My childhood cousin and my classmate were sons of sisters. So.
Micah Yassia say absolutely no Liberian is going to fight fear tactics. No Liberian is going to fight fear tactics. It's consistently being used to scale. Fear tactics is consistently being used to scale Liberians who have not had the opportunity to experience true justice. James S. Keller said, good luck to the people who are pushing this war crimes court. One thing I know for sure, it is not going to work. Danielle, that's the, before we draw down the curtains, maybe, first let's go to Mr. Attorney Charles for, no, if Daniel, if you have further questions before we have our last closing statement from the attorney.
No further questions.
All right. For those who are watching us all across the world, we say thank you so much for coming. We go back to our guest for his final thoughts.
Well, here are my final thoughts. We're all Liberians. We all love our country. I love my country dearly. I cannot emphasize how I miss my native Bong County. I wish I could go to Banga, pass through, and go to Kokoya district where I was born and where I grew up. But the reality of the country today is that I cannot do that. Our country is broken. Nothing is working. Liberians are not happy. The issue of justice has not been addressed. It has been jettisoned. Conflicts are still brewing. We Liberians should all come together, put aside our ethnic differences, put aside our tribal differences, put aside our political differences, religious differences, and come together and help build a decent society where all of our children can live in peace. Some of us have lived in the West for quite some time, but look at how we're living here. Okay, look at how we're living here. Our cousins who arrived in this country centuries ago have not even been accepted in this society, let alone will we be accepted. Our dignity as humanity lies in Africa. Our dignity rests in Africa, and for us Liberians, it rests in Liberia. Let us put aside our differences. Let us come together and take the basic steps that are necessary for a conducive, democratic, free society. Here is what I'm going to leave you people with. One, the law says that crimes against humanity cannot be pardoned. And the law also said that those who committed crimes against humanity are incompetent as a matter of law to pardon themselves. Let us come together and hold our war laws accountable. Accountability is not retribution. Okay? Accountability is not retribution at all. Accountability in this instance prevents future generations from repeating the mistakes of the past. A war crimes code in Liberia will help all of us. It will help our judiciary. It will help our lawyers to sharpen their skill. It will help our lawyers to learn the practical steps necessary for decent lawyering. Let us advocate justice. Advocating justice is not being against anybody's ethnicity. And for those of us who belong to the same ethnicity as the forces who committed this crime, we should come out of our closet and take the lead. The man killed wherever might not have been from your ethnicity, but his decency and dignity as a human being is not different from yours. Do not support members of your ethnic kinsman just because you share the same tribe with them. Be like Hassan Belity. Be like me. I support holding Mano and Kyo people who committed atrocity against humanity in Liberia accountable. I was born to a Mano father. I speak Mano, but being a man doesn't stop me from advocating justice. If we do this, if we take those steps together, we will make Liberia a better place. Our country is rich. Our country has resources that we can turn into finished product, but we cannot do it within a political environment that is characterized by conflict. Let us all come together, seek the better interests of Liberia, and work together. Let us demand justice. Those of us living in the United States should call United States Congressman Elroy's office and ask the U.S. Congress to take action on Liberia to demand that Liberia establish a war crimes court. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And we've been, this is the part 2 of the war crimes court debate. It's been a healthy one. You see, one thing we admonish our viewers, even those who are opposed to war crimes court, they are not criminals, or that doesn't necessarily mean that they are supporters of war criminals or they are tied to them. It's just being another side of the debate. So we want to thank you so much. From my experience, talking to people on this topic, you find that there is there's a lot of support for war crimes court. Where a lot of people differ is on the timing. Some believe they support it, but not now. They can do it later and all the different things. But in any case, keep your comments coming. You can go back on Facebook and make comments. I'm sure the attorney is going to respond. Next week, we're going to be featuring talk show hosts. We want to focus on Liberia. We'll be bringing together various hosts from various talk shows. They will be here to first introduce their platform and also to discuss current events. Last week, we thank those who have been donating to Facebook to focus on Liberia, and we forgot.
Dennis, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, I think Dennis's internet may have dropped, so I will continue for him until he gets back. As he mentioned, we next Sunday, again at 6 p.m. Eastern, we will have some talk show hosts, popular Facebook talk show hosts, to join us and discuss current events. And on Wednesday this week, we will come together to discuss the topic of More Than Me and Katie Myler, the case of McIntosh Johnson. We've all been talking about it. There's lots of discussion on social media about it. A very important situation to talk about. So we are trying to gather our information and gather some guests. And on Wednesday, we will be joining to talk about that. Also, just for my final thoughts on the War and Economic Crimes Court, I know that it's a very touchy subject for a lot of Liberians, especially for those of us who had to live during the war and experience it. So I can't, in good conscience, tell someone who is suffering to just get over it, or someone who has a pain to just get over it. As Dennis mentioned, a lot of us are just concerned with timing. The truth of the matter is, Liberia is like watching 10 burning buildings. Which one, and you have one fire truck, where do you start? You know, so I understand people's concern for wanting to develop Liberia first, post the war crime court. Then there's also just the concern that because we haven't addressed this issue sooner, it's almost like a dysfunctional family. You know, here we are at this point functioning on a dysfunction. There are people who are accused, and it's alleged, committed war crimes, but they are in positions, elected positions, you know, positions of power. Now, how do we at this point move forward from that? So that's another concern. At the end of the day, I want the best for Liberia, and I hope that the president and his team will use their best judgment to decide what is best for Liberia. Okay, and I don't think Dennis will be able to join us again. I'm not totally sure what his message was in terms of the thanks. I feel like we probably forgot someone last week. And I guess he will come back next week or by Wednesday to let us know who we forgot. But just again, Wednesday, we'll be coming back on to talk about the More Than Me Foundation in School and Katie Myler and the rape case and the recent article in the ProPublica, by ProPublica in the Time magazine. And then Sunday, we'll have some popular Facebook talk show hosts come and discuss current events with us. Okay, and that'll be again Sundays